grave. Alda is here performing, as I say, in her role as Nyanga Nyamusoro. And she's, Machini's asked me to tell you that he's the person who filmed it. It's early in the morning. She's explaining to the ancestors, in particular her uncle Malangatana, and the most recently departed of the family, who was Jelita Ngwenya, who was Malangatana's wife. And Machini's asked me to say that she's actually addressing not only the ancestors in general here, but she's speaking to the most recently departed spirit, who was Jelita. It was Jelita. Malangatana sadly passed away in 2011 before I started work. So it fell to Jelita to authorize the work I was doing. So it was actually yes or no whether I got to do it or not. And so Alda is here invoking the spirit of Jelita Ngwenya was her full name, and telling her about the book. So I'll just play that and I'll explain this. Okay, that was the first book off the press. I haven't seen it when I asked Jürgen and Michael to send the first copy to Gini and to London, so that is actually the very first time. The next clip is another clip of her performing, and she's then moved from the graveside to this extraordinary arts complex that Malangatana built in Matalana, which he aimed to be a centre which was for local people to perform, to learn music, to learn skills, develop their skills, for example, printing, fabrics, animal husbandry, and so on. And also he even installed an amphitheatre. Can you believe it? In Matalana, the red earth of Matalana, a sort of Greek style amphitheatre, which I've got a wonderful picture of Ben Mosana, who's a classicist and has a reputation for standing in polyterions and amphitheatres all over the world. I've got a great picture of Ben standing in Malangatana's amphitheatre. Anyway, we've moved to the library complex. It's called the Centro Cultural for Matalana, and Alda is going to get on her knees and pray to the ancestors. She's holding the book, and on the floor in front of her, you can see a crucial part of the performance, which we're actually highly privileged to see. As I say, she has been incredibly open to give permission for these things to be shown in public, because they're not things which are usually performed or filmed or photographed in any way. But she's done this for you. That container down there is called rapé. It's snuff, basically, and the ancestors are known to like snuff. And if you make an offering of snuff, they're more likely to listen, more likely to appear. So this is a short clip of Alda performing again.
swaleswi n'wana Ngwenya ni ntukulu wenu wa le kokwana Mandisi na wa le kokwana Soyasi afoli hi George nguva ya vafana tolo ka masiku hi swona swi endleke mu hanyisa xiswona mu hanya hi ntumbuluko a ntumbuluko a hi wu lahlanga kokwana ni kona mina na Muchini a ntukulu wenu na mina Museu ntukulu wenu ku mi bikela leswaku khani mamu mintizo hinkwayo leyi yi tiziwiki hi ntukulu hi n'wanenu ntukulu hi nga Malangatana Valente Ngwenya hi leyi namuntlha hi taka hi bika vutomi hi ku khani mamu va ka Ngwenya a ve nkulungwana a ve nkulu lowu biwaka hi vankulungwana ku hi nyoxela buku lebyiya byi ta nga famba amatiko hinkwayo ya misava hi kona nguva hi ni vatukulu hi tshibekeli hikuva hi bikela hi nawu a ku hi ta lahli ntumbuluko ni ku hala van'wini hala va ta swi vona leswaku hi batlile a swi kotanga a ku va henhla hi ya kotele ka nyilambi kambe hikokuva hi khisama laha hi mi bikela swi nyingi ta va ku ri kona a wu voni byeli byi ta va byi ri kona hala van'wini vulongolovo mi va swi bula na kona na vanchigiyano va santlhava
And then the last message we've got from those key people in Mozambique is a written declaration from Chile, and I'm going to invite Chile to come up and read it to us that you offered to be honest.
This is a message for the launch of Richard Gray's book by Malangatana Ngwenya. I would like to share a few words on this meaningful occasion, marking the launch of the published version of the doctorate thesis by our friend and colleague, Richard Gray, dedicated to the life and work of Malangatana Valente Ngwenya. This moment, beyond honoring the author, calls us to a broader reflection on the importance of academic records in recognizing and preserving the artistic and human heritage of Mozambique. This work, now accessible to a wider public, transcends academic writing, and it becomes a bridge across times, geographies, and generations. A testimony of lived experiences that, while deeply rooted in a specific context, continue to speak to our contemporary reality. By focusing on Malangatana's time in Nampula from 1978 to 1982, Richard Gray offers us a rigorous and sensitive reading of a defining phase in the artist's journey. A period marked by community engagement, daily pedagogy, and the integration of art, culture, and citizenship. Through this lens, we are invited to revisit Malangatana not only as a visual artist, but also as an activist, educator, and a humanist. Note of absence. For reasons beyond my control, I deeply regret being unable to attend the launch in person. Despite the distance, I am moved and proud to accompany this symbolic moment for all those who recognize in Malangatana an essential figure in our collective memory. and Richard Gray, an author committed to truth, rigor, and empathy in his approach to history and art. May this publication be a further step in preserving and disseminating Malangatana's legacy and an inspiration for future research on Mozambican art and artists. Acknowledgements. I take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude to all those who contributed to the successful completion of this work. To the author, Richard Gray, for the respect and accuracy with which he approached Malangatana's journey. To the artist's family, the academic institutions involved, and all those who preserve and share his living memory. May this book inspire new generations to study, create, and transform society with the same passion and dedication that Malangatana always demonstrated. Magdalena, 20 July 2025, Malangatana Ngwenya Muchini. Thank you.
That was great. We're going to move on now. I'll just tell you the rest of the programme while you're getting itching in your seats. We're going to hear from our guest speaker, Dr. Chris Spring, a little bit more from my dad about what this means going forward in 2025 and what we can do going forward to spread the word about Malangatana. And then we're going to have a story, which I'm really looking forward to. I've seen one of these performances before, and it's fantastic, so stick around for that. There's also some drinks at the back. Please feel free to use the loo and grab a drink if you'd like to have a sit down while that's happening. All right. And I've just been told there are some seats at the front if anyone would like to come and take a few of those. Make sure you rest your legs if you need to. All right, so I'm going to introduce Dr. Chris Spring, who wrote the foreword for the book. He is a British artist, author, and former curator at the British Museum, where he led exhibitions such as South Africa, Art of the Nation, and the Sainsbury African Galleries. He is an expert in African art with acclaimed books like Angaza Africa and African Textiles Today. As a practicing visual artist, he works from the West London Art Factory, and his mixed media work has been widely exhibited. Chris also plays a leading role in cultural organisations, including the Africa Centre and October Gallery, and contributes to African soft power and cross-cultural dialogue in writing, art and education. So welcome, Dr. Chris Spring.
Thanks a lot, and it's just great to be back here at the Africa Centre. It's a privilege to be a trustee here for quite a few years. And thank you, Richard, for inviting me. Wonderful memories of Mozambique too. I was also privileged to spend quite a few years in Mozambique. But as you were saying, I was a curator at the African Galleries at the British Museum. But before that, I was pitched into all things African at the Museum of Mankind. That was in 1987, exactly the same year that the Africa Centre was putting on an exhibition of Malangatana's work. And back then at the Museum of Mankind, certainly none of us would have heard of Malangatana. And really, I think people at that stage were not thinking too hard, certainly not in museums, about what became known as contemporary African art. Now I think that term has kind of disappeared, which is great. But I, in a sense, was a fraud. I wasn't a trained anthropologist, I wasn't an archaeologist, I wasn't even an art historian. Somehow I kind of slipped in through the back door. And in some other ways, though, that kind of held me in good stead, because I really felt critical, I suppose, towards some of the exhibitions that we were doing there. I could see that there were elements that were missing. And when it came to the Africa galleries being built at the main British Museum site in Bloomsbury, my senior colleagues, foolishly or not, said to me, well, you can lead. I don't know why they said that, really. Maybe they thought their careers were long as they left. Anyway, they left it to me. And I said, well, as an artist, I'm going to introduce our public, not through what they're expecting to see, because back in those days, African art meant to people, mainly wood sculpture, these wonderful masterworks of Benin bronzes and textiles and metalwork and so on. But instead I'll introduce them through contemporary artists, artists perhaps working in those fields, but giving a sense of dynamism from the now to the deep past. And only about, I think, a couple of years after the Africa Galleries opened at the British Museum, my friend Elspeth Court, who also worked at SOAS, said to me, you need to go to an exhibition, and not in Africa, but here in the Oxo Tower in London. And it's an exhibition of work by artists from Mozambique. It was a project started up by a wonderful Bishop Sengolani to get some of these many guns that were still left in the country after war was finally banished, in a sense, from Mozambique in 1992. And Bishop Sengolani got artists to turn these weapons that had come out of the bush. They had this wonderful project, give us your guns and we will give you more useful hardware. And artists in Mozambique, in Maputo, turned these guns, these weapons of war, into sculptures. So I went down to the Oxo Gallery. It was a cold January day. I thought, I don't really want to go down there and see these things. And I went in there, I was just knocked out. They were amazing sculptures. One of them in particular, which became known as the Throne of Weapons, was by a Mozambican artist whose name was Kester, and later became a good friend. And I saw this Throne of Weapons, mainly made of AK-47s. But when we got back to the BM, we discovered many more weapons from before the Second World War, even, kind of washing around in the arms trade. And I went back and I said, we've got to get this work. It was a bit of a risk, in a sense, to put it into the Africa Galleries, because in some ways it might have been seen as promoting an idea of continuous violence and war in Africa. Instead, it did the kind of complete reverse. It told very much of peace. And Neil McGregor helped by calling it, within 2 years, more iconic than the Rosetta Stone, which really raised the hackles of my Egyptian antiquities colleagues. But it was a result. And as a result of that, I said, I want to go to Mozambique. I want to meet Bishop Sengolani. I want to go to Maputo. I want to meet these artists who created these pieces. And I think it was Christian Aid who was sponsoring this whole charity at that time. And the BBC film crew, we all went out to Maputo. And I began to meet the artists. And I remember going to the Natural History Museum and seeing Malangatana's amazing mural there of these wonderful faces. And somehow outside, with the sun in different parts of the sky and vegetation in front of it, it changed and it kind of worked in a different way for every moment of the day. It really struck a chord in me, not just because it was my first introduction to Malangatana's art, but in a way it was very early on in my experience of Mozambique. And from then on, I just spent several years working on and off in Mozambique in various different ways, working in museums in different parts of the country, inevitably having to work at the British Museum. We needed to work with museum colleagues, and that was a privilege too, with Juliet and Matilde at the National Museum of Art, which I think Malangatana helped to found. Towards the end of my time there, I met Malangatana himself, which was a great privilege. We put together a film of the Tree of Life, which had an introduction which included work by Malangatana and other Mozambican artists. And I knew my old friend Magdalena Dundo, who is an amazing ceramicist and one of the first artists I commissioned for the Africa Gallery. She had known Malangatana for many years. And she said, "Oh, you're going to see Malangatana?" I said, "Yep." She said, "Give him this pair of socks." I said, why this pair of socks? He'll know what it means. So I went there and walked into this amazing studio full of Malangatana's works. And he wonderfully said hello and pretty much the first thing I did was to say, "Look, can I just give you this pair of socks because, I've got to do that, and then we can talk." And he bellowed in laughter. I still don't know what the was. Even though I think, she won't tell me, but it was a lovely introduction to a great artist. And I didn't know Richard Gray had been working for many years by this time, and was a close friend of Malangatana, and was bringing his work to prominence. Yeah, okay, it had appeared in collections of works that a book called Angaza Africa, and I included his work in that, and his work appeared in various other collections. But so important to have an in-depth study like this of many artists, I think, who people know from these general exhibitions, but they don't know the depth of their work. That for European artists, for example, would be almost without question, once you've had a major exhibition, people will write a detailed biography. And I don't know many that are in this category of what Richard has created. It's such an important book, and it really speaks of not just Malangatana, but I think the many people that he was involved with over the years, bringing not only peace to Mozambique, but a kind of recognition of the wonderful artistry and also, I think, the great bravery of people in Mozambique who were faced with wars that were not of their own making. It's a great achievement. And I'm proud to say people come from Mozambique still to the Tree of Life, which was the sculpture that the four artists I worked with in Maputo created for the British Museum. It became a kind of symbol for one of those festivals of African art, Africa 05. And just was a lovely kind of way in for people to the galleries. For many months we had it in the Great Court of the PM, and then it made its way down to the Africa galleries. So that's kind of about me, and it's about Mozambique, it's about Malangatana, and a thank you to Richard for this incredible book. I've been panning through it online, but I look forward to holding a weighty copy. I don't know, and my nearest Nando's at Ealing Common is the first Nando's ever in London. So go to the Ealing Common Nando's. And when you get to Ealing Common Station, get on the Piccadilly line up to Park Royal, and round the corner you get to the West London Art Factory where I've got my studio. You'll be very welcome. Many of us.
Thank you so much, Chris. Chris is saying he's very open to questions. I think we should speed on, and then when we get to those drinks, which are rapidly warming up, we need to accelerate a little bit here. We're all longing to hear Yusuf's story, but there is one serious thing that I want to say. A couple of serious things I want to say before we ease up and your glazed expressions can begin to liven up a little bit with a glass of prosecco or fruit juice according to your taste. And after enjoying Yusuf's story, but these are some reflections of mine, which kind of thoughts I've had while these months that the book's been in the final stages of production in Berlin. But first I'm going to mention a couple of the sparks that got the whole project started. I'll take you back to 2013 when Tate Modern put on an exhibition of Malangatana's contemporary, the great Sudanese artist Ibrahim Salai. And I was there, Ben and Crystal were there, and they spotted in one of the vitrines a catalogue of a joint exhibition which Malangatana had with Salai in 1963 at the ICA. So, you know, what's happened? This is what are we working back up to this? Anyway, in front of the vitrine, I couldn't get to look at it. Ben came over and said, "Hey Dad, you need to come and see this." That's Malangatana, isn't it? Yes, it was. But I couldn't get to see it because there were two women standing in front of me. And they just stood and stood and stood. And they were talking, I overheard them talking. They were talking about Malangatana. They obviously clearly knew him. They knew Mozambique. And they didn't budge. When they finally moved, turned round, one of them looked at me and wagged her finger in my face and said, "I know you." And my Australian accent is very good. It was Julie Clift, who again is an apologising tonight. She's in Australia. She hasn't been involved. She's the doctor who's worked in Mozambique since independence, has been there forever, since 1975 until now. And she turned around and said, wagged her finger in my face, said, "I know you. You were with Julia, aren't you? You were with Julia, Napula." And she knew Julia from health circles in Mozambique. And we got talking, and the other person who was there was you, wasn't it? You were the second person who was there. Well, do you remember the conversation? Because you and Julie said, "Come on, we need to do something about this. We can't have, you know, we need to, it's about time if Tate recognised it as Sakai, it's about time they recognised Malangatana again." And so, if you like, that was a moment that was a moment that sparked off the book. So a big clap for the And please tell Julie that she got her mention tonight, or she couldn't pass that on to her. And the second thing, speak up, Richard, the second thing I want to say is how the idea of the book came about. In 2017, I was in Maputo. Ben was with me, so he can vouch for this war went down. Muccini and several others, Atelier, Ngwenya, various people there, invited me to be a speaker at this symposium which they were doing about Malangatana to honour Malangatana's birthday. I said, "What? You're the people who know him. You know, I knew him in Napula, but it's been many, many years I've been back in London. You're the people who know him. What do you want me to talk at this symposium for?" They said, "Look, you knew him in Napula. When he went to Napula, he was the Malangatana we knew. When he came back, he was different. And you're one of the very people who know what happened in Napula." And so they said, "That's why we want you to talk." And then afterwards, when we finally made it to the drinks, which we were getting close to, don't worry, we were chatting, and they kind of, at one point in the conversation, they sort of leaned heavily towards me, looked at me very meaningfully and said, about time somebody wrote a book about the old book." And I said, well, I'd love to, but who am I? If Richard Gray rocks up to a publisher in London and says, I want to write a book about this almost unknown African artist, and who are you? Some individual from New Cross. I'll get nowhere. But I said, what I could possibly do is go the academic route and try and apply to do a PhD. So that was where the idea, that was where this kind of project of doing it through the academic route came about. That was the moment. So finally, there's these two thoughts that I've had before we they're about why Malangatana matters in 2025. First of all, he spent his first 39 years under the yoke of colonialism and racism in Portuguese-ruled Mozambique. And Portuguese colonialism was one of the most ruthless, rigid forms of colonialism. The ideology was that Africans were savages. The only way for an African to be civilized was by giving up everything which made you African. Instead of speaking your maternal language, in this case Shironga, you were to speak only Portuguese. You were to dress in European clothing. You were to eat Portuguese food. And that was the only way that Africans, the African population of Mozambique, had the possibility to, in the words of their colonizers, become civilized. Malangatana rejected this. In 1961, on the eve of his first solo exhibition, he gave an interview to the main colonial newspaper, Notícias, and he said, "Podemos ser civilizados sem abandonar as nossas coisas." Which means, I'll translate it for you, thank you. It's we can be civilized without abandoning our own things. And he called it depersonalização. He called it depersonalization. The buzzword which we hear so often at this moment is dehumanization. I think you can't say that there are exact parallels in history, but there are again I'm going to use the Charlie Paul words, commonalities perhaps, between the situation which we know very well, and I'm sure I don't have to be specific, and everyone is nodding, I can see it in your faces that you know what I'm talking about. If you dehumanize people, then you can abuse them, you can do egregious things to them, you could even kill them. And Malangatana just said, no, I don't like that. And his paintings, although many people thought that he was channeling some ancient eternal spirit of Africa, or even the spirit of the collective unconscious of humanity, but actually for those with eyes to see, they knew what his agenda was. And the example that we can draw from him, from that, is that faced with that depersonalization, faced with that dehumanization of racism and colonialism in Maputo, in the whole of Mozambique at that time, he found a way through his work, through his art, to do something about it. And it's that awful feeling, which I'm sure a lot of us have at the moment, is what can we do? We're just appalled. It's so abhorrent what's going on. He found a way, he did what he could do, and in that way he speaks to us across the years, although he's passed on since 2011. He was a person who used the talents he got, who used the things he could do to stand up against the dehumanization which was going on in his life in colonial times. After independence in 1975, I think there's another parallel, because if I say that Mozambique was attacked by an apartheid regime in the next door territory, does that ring any bells with you today? I'm going to finish by giving you his own words about it. He said that Renamo, which was the dissident organisation in Mozambique, which was a proxy organisation supported by the South African apartheid regime across the border from Mozambique, caused absolute mayhem. It did economic sabotage, as I think we saw in the film earlier. Over 1 million Mozambicans were killed. If you do the proportions, I forget the figures, but as a proportion of those killed to the whole population, that is alarmingly higher than the deaths in Britain in the Second World War. So Mozambique had a real bad time in the 1980s from this internal war, which was backed by the armed, the bandidos, as I call them, were armed by South Africa and their international friends, kept their mouths shut. Does that ring any bells? And what Malangatana said was that Renamo, this dissident organisation backed by South Africa, intend the total destruction of generation upon generation of my people. It's a huge tragedy. I sense that their objective is to destroy our future, everything that can be a tomorrow, bearing witness to what we were yesterday and what we are today. And I'm finishing on that note that he used his art. There are 3 paintings in particular which are in Maputo and which, come on, the tape needs to show them. It's from 1963 to 2025, it's too long. And, well, I rest my case.
So I have the easy part of thanking everybody for this evening, and the drinks are at the back, by the way. So I'd like to thank Dr. Chris Spring. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time this evening to speak about Malangatana. I'd like to thank Richard's daughter and his wife, Julia, who, yes, you've done a fantastic job. You got a job at the Africa Centre anytime. Poorly paid, but it was. And I would really like to thank everybody that's been involved with this project. Most of all, to thank Richard. Richard, when you were giving thanks at the end, I was about to cut you off, but then somebody said thank you to me, so I then thought myself, thank God I didn't stop it. But okay, so talking about this last night, Richard said optimistically, he said, oh, I'm bringing 3 boxes of these books. And I said, Richard, I wouldn't do that about you because you're going to have to take them back. But he has bought 3 boxes of these books. So Richard will be signing these books. I know that they're pricey, but they are really worth it. It's an incredible book, aimed largely at institutions, but if you can find a penny or 2, relieve Richard of taking these back home. But Richard, I reserve our last thanks to you from the Africa Centre, from the board, from my staff, from all of our friends. You have done an incredible job. I mean, this is an amazing achievement. And the thing is, it will stand the test of time. It will live beyond all of us as a testament to this incredible artist, Malangatana. Thank you very much, Richard, for what you have done. And please have a look at the book, peruse it, then buy it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, so that the reason to back up what I was saying, one of the things that Malangatana loved to say was when you've got something hard to do and something a bit tricky, is good. So we put a couple of plates of dried mango. So when you come to take out your mortgage on one of the books, yourselves to a slice of mango, it'll make it easier. And what I suggest we do, Yusuf, would it be all right if we give people a chance to grab a drink and then sit down again? Do you want to go? You want to go? You want to go and do your thing? All right. Well, you're going to have to wait a bit longer. Can I introduce Yusuf Jallo? He's a storyteller.